"I only miss when I mean to," the gunman said, while the cut rope still whipped above the hanging platform and the boy dropped hard into the dust, coughing like he had swallowed half the town square. Nobody in Bitterwash moved. The noon heat sat over the street like a blacksmith's lid. Flies worried the mule teams. The church bell, struck by the same shot that cut the noose, still hummed over the roofs. Sheriff Tom Brax stood on the gallows with his hand frozen above his revolver, his mouth open, his face gone chalk pale beneath the sunburn. The crowd had come for a hanging. What they got instead was a warning. The stranger stood beside the water trough, coat hanging straight, hat low, rifle smoking. He did not look proud of the shot. He looked tired of needing it. Ben Hale rolled to his knees, rubbing his bruised throat. He was barely more than a youth, lean as fence wire, with dust stuck to the sweat on his cheeks. His sister, Nora, shoved through the crowd and dropped beside him. She was not soft, not even in fear. Her hands were rough from reins and harness leather, and the side of her jaw was dark with grease from the livery. She checked the rope burn on Ben's neck, then looked up at the gunman with eyes that did not offer gratitude too quickly. "You just bought us another minute," she said. "Sometimes a minute is enough," he answered. That voice made Sheriff Brax finally remember himself. He drew, slow but angry. Throw down the rifle. The gunman turned his head. Not fast, not dramatic, just enough. Brax stopped. There were men in 3 territories who had heard of Eli Mercer and never wished to hear of him again. Some called him the cleanest shot west of the Pecos. Some called him a butcher with manners. In Bitterwash, most only knew the stories, and stories had a way of growing teeth in dry country. But fear moved through the crowd all the same, quiet as a rattlesnake under boards. Eli slung the rifle across his back and stepped into the street. His boots stirred white dust. Somewhere a shutter banged in the hot wind. Somewhere a horse stamped and blew through its nose. "You got a warrant for hanging the boy?" Eli asked. Brax licked his lips. Witnesses saw him running from Judge Wren's office. That makes him fast, not guilty. He had blood on him. So would any man who found a body. Nora rose beside Ben. He went to deliver oats. He found the judge on the floor with half his face gone. One of the townsmen spat brown tobacco juice into the dirt. Judge had papers against Silas Crow. Everyone knows it. At that name, the air changed. People looked away. A screen door creaked, shut down the street. Eli saw it all. The fear, the silence, the way even truth in Bitterwash had to ask permission before speaking. He walked toward the gallows. Brax backed down a step without meaning to. Eli climbed up, crouched, and picked something from the platform boards. A flattened bullet. He rolled it between his fingers. There was a tiny crescent filed into the brass base. His jaw tightened. Nora saw it. "You know that mark." Eli closed his hand around the bullet. "I know the man who uses it." Ben stared up at him, throat raw, voice thin. "Then tell them it was not me." Eli looked at the boy longer than a stranger should have. Something in Ben's eyes had reached through the years and laid a hand on an old memory. Firelight on fence rails. A child crying in smoke. A woman shouting for the barn door to be opened. He pushed it down. "Cut him loose proper," Eli said. "I do not take orders from hired guns," Brax snapped. Eli stepped close enough for the sheriff to smell horse sweat, powder smoke, and the dry cedar scent of the trail. "Then take advice. If Crow killed the judge, hanging this boy before supper only buries the truth deeper." The name hit Brax harder than the threat. Everyone in town knew Crow owned half the valley, the river ditch, the grain scales, and most of the men who pretended law still meant something. He had not been in town that morning. That almost made it worse. Nora helped Ben down from the platform. The rope had raised a raw red band across his neck. Her fingers lingered there only a second before she turned hard again. "Why would you help us?" Eli looked at the bullet in his palm. "Because I was sent a letter 3 days ago by a man who knew he was dying." From inside his coat, he drew an envelope stained dark brown along one corner. Judge Wren's seal was broken. The paper inside was folded to the size of a prayer card. Eli handed it to Nora. She opened it carefully. The judge's writing shook across the page. "If this reaches you, come armed. Crow means to seize the Hale Spring by fraud, and I have proof enough to bury him. If I fall, Trust no badge in bitter Washington. Trust the woman who smells of horses and smoke. She is braver than the men around her. Nora read the line twice, then looked up sharply. He wrote about me. He wrote about courage, Eli said. I guess where to find it. Brax snatched for the letter. Eli caught his wrist. No fast draw. No flittish. Just iron grip and old force. Brax winced. You do not touch her, Eli said quietly. The sheriff jerked free and spat into the dust. Crow will hear of this before sundown. I expect he will. Nora folded the letter and tucked it into her dress pocket. Then come with us. If you truly know that bullet mark, you need to see the rest. Ben leaned weakly against her shoulder, but he was listening now, alert beneath the bruises. Eli nodded once, and the three of them crossed the square under 100 staring eyes. The heat shimmered above the roofs. Somewhere in the livery yard, a loose chain clinked in the wind. Nora's place sat at the edge of town where the dust gave way to mesquite and split-rail fences. The Hale livery had once been painted blue. Now the boards were sun-burned gray, and the sign swung on one chain, groaning with every gust. The smell of hay, old leather, horse sweat, and forge ash hung thick inside. Nora sat Ben on a grain crate, fetched water, then reached beneath the counter and brought out a cigar box. Inside lay the judge's pocket watch, a blood-stiffened handkerchief, and another spent cartridge with the same crescent filed into the brass. Eli stared at it. Jonah Creed. Nora's eyes narrowed. Who is he? Before Eli could answer, hoofbeats rolled in from the road west of town, many of them hard and fast. Ben went pale. Nora crossed to the door. Through the crack, dust rose beyond the cottonwoods like storm smoke. Eli did not need to see the rider at the front to know. Crow's found his courage, he said, and then the first shot punched through the livery wall, showering the floor with splinters. The horses screamed before the second shot came. Nora was already moving. She shoved Ben behind a stall wall, snatched a shotgun from a peg, and kicked a trough on its side for cover. Eli pulled his revolver with the lazy speed of a man who had done it so often he no longer wasted anger on the motion. Sunlight lanced through the plank gaps. Dust floated in the beams like shaken flour. Outside, men spread through the yard. Mercer, a voice called. Smooth, confident, amused. You always did prefer entering town with a hymn and a gunshot. Silas Crow. Eli crouched beside the doorway and looked through a knothole. Crow set a black gelding in the center of the yard, broad-shouldered, clean-vested, silver watch chain bright against his shirt. He did not dress like a rancher. He dressed like a man who wanted the world to understand he could buy rancher's whole. 6 riders fanned behind him with rifles across their saddles. Nora set the shotgun barrel over the trough. How many men? 7 with Crow. Maybe more in the road dust. Ben coughed from a stall. Leave me. He wants me and the proof. No, Nora said. Crow laughed as if he had heard. Girl, the law already failed your brother. Do not make me fail you too. Eli stepped into the doorway before she could stop him. The yard flashed white with heat. Flies lifted from the manure pile. Crow smiled wider. There he is, Crow said. The man who cannot leave ghosts buried. You killed Wren. Crow shrugged. The judge mislaid his caution. You framed the boy. I used what was close. Nora's grip tightened on the shotgun so hard the knuckles went bloodless. Ben stared from the shadow between 2 restless bays. Eli felt the old pull then, the easy road he had once taken. Kill Crow where he sat. Kill the riders after. End it with smoke and iron. It would be simpler. It would also make everything Crow said about him true. You still miss on purpose? Crow asked. Or was that sermon in the square meant for the widow? Eli did not answer. Crow tilted his head. I came for the cartridges, Mercer, and the judge's ledger, if Wren managed to pass it on before dying stupid. Give them over, and I let the livery stand. Nora spoke from inside. You burned our first home. Try another roof, and I will put both your eyes on the dirt. For the first time, Crow's smile slipped. Your father should have taught you silence before he tried heroics. The words struck like a hammer. Ben lurched up, fury overcoming fear. Eli caught him before he could run into the yard. There, Crow said softly. That temper, same as the old man. Eli turned enough for Crow to see his face clearly. Right away. Crow chuckled. You know I cannot. Too many loose ends. Too much water under Hale Spring. Too much money in thirsty men. So that was it. The spring. Judge Wren had not died over a personal quarrel or a sudden robbery. He had died because the one clear spring between Bitterwash and the freight road sat on Hale land, and Crow meant to seize it before the railroad surveyors came. Water was worth more than cattle in a summer like this. Nora looked at Eli, understanding all at once. That is why Wren wrote you. Eli kept his eyes on Crow. Yes. Then choose, Crow called. You can keep your old code, or you can keep these two breathing. The yard went still except for the wind scraping a loose tin sheet against the feed shed. Eli could smell hot dust, horsehide, and the sour tang of old fear rising from deep memory. Years earlier, when Crow rode evictions in the valley, Eli had chosen silence because he told himself it was not his fight. By nightfall, a barn had burned, a father had died, and 2 children had hidden under a water trough while their mother bled out in smoke. He had carried that silence longer than any gun. Not again. He lowered his revolver. Nora swore under her breath. Ben looked betrayed. Crow smiled, certain he had won. Then Eli let the gun fall deliberately into the dust at his boot and raised both hands. You want me? Take me. They stay. Nora hissed. What are you doing? Buying time. Crow studied him. You offering yourself for a widow and a half-hanged boy. You grow sentimental. Maybe I grow tired. Crow signaled 2 riders forward. The moment they dismounted, Nora fired through the doorway. The shotgun blast tore one man from the saddle and spun the other behind a rain barrel. Eli moved on the sound. He snatched his dropped revolver, shot the barrel, and drove a wall of water and splinters into the yard. Horses reared. Ben vaulted the stall gate, grabbed a branding pole, and smashed a rider across the jaw as he stumbled near the door. Back room, Nora shouted. They ran through the stable, past frightened horses and swaying lanterns, into the tack room at the rear. Nora kicked aside a sack pile, revealing a narrow trapdoor. Ben blinked. Since when do we have a cellar? Since the year after Crow burned the house, she said. Gunfire hammered the livery front. Dust sifted from the beams. Eli dropped through first into cool, dirt-smelling of earth and old apples. Nora handed Ben down, then descended and dragged the trap shut above them. Darkness pressed close until she struck a lucifer and lit a lamp. The cellar was no wider than a grave room. Shelves lined the walls with jars, horse medicine, a coil of telegraph wire, and an iron strongbox. Nora knelt at the box and worked a key from her collar. Judge Wren brought this at dawn. Said if he did not return by noon, I was to open it only with a man named Eli Mercer present. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, several land deeds, and a small tin envelope. Eli broke the envelope seal. 1 page, 1 sentence. Mercer, the preacher is Crow's man. Do not let the ledger sleep in church walls. Ben swore swiftly. Reverend Pike heard my confession this morning. Overhead, boots thudded through the livery. Men shouted. Something heavy overturned. A horse kicked its stall. The lamp flame trembled. Nora wrapped the ledger and shoved it at Eli. Take it and ride. If Crow gets this, he owns the valley. Eli looked at her. And leave you. You said sometimes a minute is enough. I'm giving you more. He almost laughed at the fierceness in her voice. Almost. Instead, he tucked the ledger into his coat. No, we leave together. A crashing blow struck the trap above. Another. Ben Fleen's head. Eli blew out the lamp and drew his revolver in the dark. Back tunnel. Nora nodded. Runs to the wash beyond the mesquite. Then, through the boards above them, Crow's voice came low and certain. You can crawl out west, Mercer. I already sent riders to meet you there. The cellar went cold. The third blow split the trapdoor. Light knife down through the crack, harsh and yellow. Dust rained into the cellar. Ben reached for the branding pole he had carried through the tunnel door like a spear from a poorer age. Nora slid a revolver from a shelf behind the jars and checked the cylinder with quick, practiced fingers. Eli listened, not to the shouting above, but to the spaces between it. Men at the trap. Men at the rear lot. Hooves outside the west wash, just as Crow promised. He had drawn the ring tight. Tunnel first, Eli whispered. Fast. No lantern. Nora found the rear hatch by touch. It opened into a low clay throat that smelled of damp roots and old flood mud. Ben went in ahead because he was the smallest. Nora followed. Eli backed in last, pulled the hatch shut, and crawled after them as boots crashed into the cellar behind. The tunnel narrowed until the ceiling scraped his shoulders. Air moved faintly ahead, carrying sage, sand, and the far smell of storm dust, though the sky had been clean blue all day. Voices echoed behind them, muffled and furious. A shot boomed in the dark and flattened against the clay somewhere to Eli's left. Ben cursed. They found the hatch. Keep moving, Nora said. The tunnel ended in a screen of greasewood roots on the bank above a dry wash. Ben pushed through first and sucked down air. Eli emerged in a glaring afternoon. The wash cut west of town like an old scar, 30 feet wide, strewn with pale stones and thorn brush. Mesquite leaned over the banks. Heat shimmered above the sand. Beyond, to the south ridge, 3 riders appeared exactly where Crow said they would. A rifle cracked. Stone chips stung Eli's cheek. Down, he barked. They slid into the wash as bullets snapped through brush overhead. Nora dragged Ben behind a boulder. Eli took the other side and fired once, not at a man, but at a hanging hornet nest under the ridge lip. The shot shattered the nest. A dark cloud rose screaming around the nearest horse. The animal bolted sideways, bucking, and threw its rider in a blur of legs and dust. Ben stared. You didn't mean to miss. Eli reloaded. I told you. Another rifle barked from the north bank. That had not been part of Crow's west line. They were being pinched from both sides. Nora peered over the stone. There, by the cottonwood root. She fired before the sentence ended. The man behind the root yelped and dropped his hat. Good shot. Eli looked at her once, quickly. Where did you learn that? My mother shot coyotes before sunrise and liars after supper. He almost smiled. The moment vanished when hoofbeats thundered upstream. Crow himself rode into view on the high bank, coat-tails flapping, eyes bright with the kind of joy cruel men felt when the trap was sprung exactly to plan. Behind him came Reverend Pike, black coat dusty, white collar crooked, holding a Winchester like it belonged to some other version of God. Ben went rigid. He heard everything. Yes, Eli said. That was the point. Crow raised his voice over the wind. Mercer, toss me the ledger, and I might forget the rope burns on the boy. You forgot better men than us, and still slept well, Nora called back. Crow pointed at Ben. That one is not better. That one is useful. A shot slammed into the boulder beside Nora's face. She jerked back, blood bright, along her temple where flying stone cut her skin. Ben lunged toward her. Eli grabbed him again. It felt like catching fire with bare hands. The boy's rage was all heat, no shape. Hold her scarf there, Eli said. Press hard. He scanned the wash. South ridge, 2 rifles left after the horse wreck. North bank, at least one hidden by cottonwood. Crow and Pike above. No clean way out. No time to wait. The western lip dropped toward a narrow slot where floodwater had carved a path through black rock. If they reached it, the riders on horseback would lose ground. We run for the slot, Eli said. Ben looked at him as if he had lost his senses. Across open sand? Better than dying behind a rock. He fired twice in quick rhythm, kicking dust under Crow's horse and shattering Pike's rifle stock at the wrist. The Reverend cried out and reeled back. Eli rose in the same motion. Now! They ran. Sand slid under their boots. Bullets snapped past, hot as hornets. Nora stumbled once, then kept going with blood down her cheek and one hand still clamped to the scarf at her temple. Ben stayed beside her, shouldering her when the ground dipped. Eli covered their rear, firing measured shots that made riders duck, wheel, or think twice before exposing a head or shoulder. He was not shooting to kill unless he had to. That was the trouble with mercy. It demanded accuracy and nerve at the same time. They reached the slot at full breath. Black stone walls rose tight around them, cool in shadow, smelling of lichen and trap damp. For 10 seconds there was only panting, dripping blood and the scrape of boots on shale. Then Ben stopped. At the far end of the slot, A man stepped from behind a rock with a shotgun leveled at Nora's chest. Tom Brax. The sheriff looked worse up close. Sweat had made pale rivers through the dust on his face. His left eye twitched. He was scared, which made him dangerous. I knew where the tunnel came out, he said. I just needed Crow to drive you proper. Nora lifted her revolver a fraction. Brax cocked the shotgun. Do not. Eli lowered his gun. You sell every soul in town for a badge and a pat on the head? Brax's jaw worked. Crow keeps the wells running. No, Nora said. He keeps men thirsty. Brax looked at Ben. I'm taking the boy. Ben spat at his boots. The sheriff's face darkened. He shifted the barrel toward Ben, and that tiny movement decided everything. Eli could have shot Brax through the throat. Instead, he turned his wrist and fired wide. The bullet hit the slot wall above Brax, shattered rock, and sent a slab of black stone crashing down between them. The shotgun roared blind. Buckshot tore sparks from stone and caught Eli across the ribs like a rake of fire. He hit the ground hard. Nora screamed his name. Ben dragged her deeper into the slot, while Brax fought the fallen stone and cursed like a trapped animal. Eli tasted blood and dust. He pushed himself up on one elbow. Warm wetness spread under his shirt. He had missed because he meant to, and because somewhere inside him, a small stubborn part still believed a frightened lawman should not die if fear was the only thing making him monstrous. Then Crow's voice rolled into the stone passage from the wash beyond, calm as evening prayer. Leave Mercer bleeding. Bring me the widow and the boy. Nora turned, eyes blazing through blood and dust. We're out of road, she said. Eli looked up, pain clawing through his side, and saw what the shadows ahead had hidden. The slot ended in an abandoned mission built into the cliff face, its old wooden doors hanging open like a broken mouth. Inside, someone had lit a lantern, and beside that lantern stood Ben Hale with his hands lifted, staring at the barrel pressed under Nora's chin by Reverend Pike. The mission smelled of wax, old adobe, and rain that had not touched the valley in years. Reverend Pike stood before the cracked altar with Nora pinned against him, one arm across her collarbones, the revolver hard under her jaw. He must have reached the mission by the ridge path while Crow drove them through the wash. His white collar was gone now, hanging loose from one button, and his face in the lantern light looked smaller, meaner, built for excuses instead of faith. Ben froze in the doorway. Eli came in after him with his revolver low and blood soaking the right side of his shirt. Every step sent a hot blade through his ribs. He kept walking anyway. Let her go, he said. Pike laughed too quickly. You are in no shape to command weather, much less me. Nora's voice came strained but steady. He never commanded weather. Only consequences. Even with a gun under her chin, she found iron. Eli felt that settle somewhere deep in him, a weight and a warmth together. Outside, distant hoofbeats circled the mission. Crow was taking his time. He knew hurt men and trapped people began bargaining with themselves long before they bargained with enemies. Pike backed Nora toward side room. The ledger. Ben looked at Eli. Eli looked at Nora. She gave the tiniest shake of her head. No. Eli pulled the oilcloth ledger from inside his coat. Pike's eyes fixed on it at once. So hungry for paper? Eli asked. What did Crow promise you? A church roof. Seed grain. A school teacher who will stay through winter. Men like you always laugh at what survival costs. That is not survival, Nora said. That is rent paid with other people's graves. Pike pressed the barrel harder. Her breath caught, but she did not cry out. Eli tossed the ledger onto a pew halfway between them. Take it. Pike squinted, suspicious. Ben edged left, nearer the cracked baptismal font. The lantern flame flickered in the draft, throwing giant shadows over saints whose faces had long ago flaked off the walls. In one of those shadows lay an old mission bell rope, frayed but still looped through the floor near the altar. Eli saw it. So did Nora. Pike stepped toward the pew, dragging Nora with him. Ben moved suddenly, kicking the font over. It hit the floor with a thunder of stone. Pike flinched. Nora slammed her heel down on his instep, twisted free, and Eli fired. Not at Pike. At the lantern. Glass burst. Darkness swallowed the room. The mission filled with shouting, scraping boots, and the stench of lamp oil. Then fire climbed the spilled fuel in a low, crawling line. Eli heard Nora hit the floor and roll. Heard Pike curse and trip over a pew. Heard Ben rush him. Heard fists. Heard teeth gritted against fear. By the time Eli reached them, Pike had Ben by the throat and was groping blindly for the dropped revolver. Eli drove his boot into the preacher's ribs. Pike collapsed wheezing. Ben seized the gun and leveled it with both shaking hands. "Do not," Eli said. Ben's face was wild in the firelight. "He sold us." "Yes." "He let them hang me." "Yes." Ben's finger tightened. Nora rose from the floor, hair loose, face smeared with soot and blood. She stepped behind Ben and placed her hand over the muzzle, lowering it by force and love together. "If you shoot him like this, he stays inside you forever." Pike curled on the tiles, coughing. Fire licked along the base of the pews. Eli bent, dragged the preacher up by the collar, and shoved him toward the door. "Get out and pray to somebody braver." They stumbled into the evening. The storm that had been only dust sent before now bruised the western sky purple. Wind hit their faces hot first, then suddenly cool. Crow's riders waited beyond the chapel yard among leaning crosses and waist-high weeds. But the first fat drops of rain had begun to strike the hard ground, darkening the dust in scattered coins. Crow sat his horse near the gate and looked at the mission smoke with irritation rather than alarm. "Always a spectacle, Mercer." Eli sved. Nora caught his elbow. The touch was firm, not tender, but it held him upright. Crow noticed everything. "He is bleeding out," Crow said. "Give me the ledger, and I will let the widow bandage what is left." Nora answered before Eli could. "You burned my mother in a barn. You do not get to speak of mercy." Crow's eyes narrowed. "So he told you." "Not yet," she said. The words landed between her and Eli like another kind of shot. Crow gave a small shrug. "Then allow me. The great Eli Mercer rode with me when your place went up. He was there the night your father died." Ben turned. Rain stippled his hair. "That true?" Eli did not hide from it. "Yes." Silence followed, broken only by thunder far off in the hills and the hissing of rain on the mission fire. Nora stared at him, and for a moment all the hard, kept things in her face went open. Hurt, recognition, an old memory lifting. "You were the rider who dragged us from under the trough." "Yes." "You left my mother's medal in my hand." Eli reached inside his shirt and pulled a thin brass saint on a leather cord. The metal was blackened at one edge. "I kept the twin. I thought one day I would bring it back with the truth. I kept choosing later." Ben looked sick. "So all this time you were one of them." "I was," Eli said. "Then I was a coward who walked away." "There is a difference, but not enough." Crow smiled in the rain. "See? Even confession sounds prettier when a dying man says it." Nora took the medal from Eli's hand. Her fingers brushed his blood-wet knuckles. She looked at the saint, at the blackened edge, then back at him. "You came anyway." "Yes." "To save us or yourself?" He considered the question because she deserved that much. Rain ran cold down his neck. The wound in his side throbbed with every heartbeat. "At first I could not tell. Now I can." "What changed?" "You did." Something moved behind her eyes then. Something quieter than forgiveness and stronger than liking. Trust, perhaps. Not full-grown, but alive. Crow clicked his tongue. "Touching." He raised his hand to signal the riders. Nora stepped between Eli and the open yard. "Inside." "Now." They retreated through the rear sacristy while Ben shoved a cabinet across the chapel door. A shot splintered the frame. Another. Then riders dismounted and spread through the graveyard. The sacristy was narrow, lined with moldy hymnals and broken candlesticks. Nora pushed Eli onto a table and ripped his shirt open at the wound. The buckshot had scored along his ribs, one pellet buried deep, the others furrowed. Blood mixed with rainwater and ran black in the lamplight from a surviving wall sconce. "This will hurt," she said. "It already does." She dug with a boiled needle and iron tweezers while Ben barred the back door and watched through a cracked shutter. Eli bit down on a leather strap and let pain pass through him like weather. Nora's hands were steady. Her eyes were not. When she found the pellet and set it on the table, it chimed against the wood. Ben spoke without turning. They're bringing something up from the road. Nora tied the bandage tight. What? Ben's voice broke. The gallows beam from town. Crow is building a hanging right here. Thunder rolled over the mission roof. Eli sat up slow, pale, breathing hard. Nora placed the brass saint back in his palm and closed his fingers around it. What did your mother say about scars? He asked. Nora met his gaze. Scars mean it lived. Outside, Crow's men hammered the beam into place, while rain darkened the earth and night came down around the mission like a curtain before the final act. By full dark, the gallows stood crooked in the mission yard, black against lightning. Crow wanted theater. Eli understood that better than most men. Cruel men rarely settled for victory when they could stage a lesson. The rain had steadied into a cold sheet that turned dust to slick clay and sent streams through the graves. Horses stamped and tossed their heads at every thunderclap. Lanterns swung from fence posts, throwing long gold blades through the storm. Inside the sacristy, Eli checked his revolver, then rewrapped the bandage once more. Every breath still hurt, but pain had sharpened instead of weakened him. Nora loaded the shotgun with dry shells kept in a wax tobacco pouch. Ben held the ledger under his coat and watched the yard through the shutter like he was trying to memorize fear before he killed it. We cannot outshoot all of them, Ben said. No, Ili answer it. So we outthink the one that matters. Nora looked over. You already have a plan. I have pieces. That has to be enough, she said. It was trust. Clear now. Earned in blood, truth, and the refusal to lie when lying might have bought comfort. Eli felt it settle in him like a stake driven in a loose ground. He laid out the plan fast. Ben would take the ledger through the crawl vent behind the old app's wall and reach the bell tower ladder from outside. Nora would circle to the stable ruins and loose the horses when the shooting started. Eli would walk into the yard alone and keep Crow looking at the wrong threat. If luck held, they would pull the riders apart. If luck failed, they would still force Crow into the open. Ben swallowed. And then I decide whether I mean to miss. Crow's voice boomed through the rain. Mercer, bring the widow, and I let the boy hang quick. Illistum. Nora caught his sleeve. You do not owe death to prove you changed. He covered her hand with his. Rain hissed on the stones outside. Somewhere overhead, the mission bell stirred in the wind, dull and waiting. I know, he said. That is why I am going. He stepped into the yard with his hat brim low and his revolver holstered. Crow stood beneath the gallows crossbeam, coat soaked dark, one glove off, pistol hanging easy at his side. Brax lurked behind him, face drawn and miserable. Reverend Pike sat bound near a grave marker where Ben had tied him after the mission fire. 2 riders held rifles on the chapel door. 3 more watched the road. Crow smiled when he saw Eli alone. Where are the faithful? Beyond your reach. Crow laughed. Nobody is beyond my reach in this valley. Lightning flashed blue-white across the yard, and for an instant every cross, shovel, horse, and dripping man stood carved in hard-bone light. Eli saw the ladder shadow along the bell tower. Good. Ben was moving. Crow stepped forward into the mud. You could have stayed gone. Men like us never belong in towns with wells and women and hope. Maybe that is why you poison all 3. Crow's eyes hardened. You think one ledger changes anything? I own the sheriff. I own the ditch company. I own the freight men who carry the law between here and the territory seat. No, Eli said. You own scared men. That expires. Crow lifted his pistol, still sermonizing. Draw. Eli did. His first shot struck the lantern hanging beside the gallows. Flame burst out and blinded the nearest rifleman. His second cut the rope holding the horse line by the stable ruins. At the same instant, Nora fired from the dark, and the whole line of horses lunged free, screaming through the graveyard in a wild churn of hooves and flying mud. Riders shouted. One went down under his own mount. Another spun away to catch loose reins. Brax fired at nothing and slipped hard in the mire. Crow kept coming. That was the measure of him. Not bravery. Appetite. He and Eli closed through rain and smoke and the swinging shadows of panicked animals. Crow shot once, twice. One round tore Eli's sleeve. The other chipped stone by his ear. Eli fired low, drove mud into Crow's face, then pivoted left as Crow lunged for a clearer lane. From above, the mission bell exploded into sound. Ben had reached the tower and was hauling the rope with both arms, ringing a storm alarm no town could ignore. In Bitterwash, church bells at night meant fire, flood, or murder. Lights sprang alive in distant windows beyond the graveyard wall. Shapes moved on the road. Crow heard it too, and for the first time, uncertainty cracked his composure. "You little bastard," he snarled. He turned toward the tower. That gave Nora her opening. She stepped from behind a grave marker and leveled the shotgun at Crow's chest. No further. Crow whipped, faster than any well-fed cattle king had a right to be, and caught her barrel aside with one hand while driving his pistol toward her ribs. Eli saw it unfold in fragments. Nora's jaw set in defiance. Crow's wet hair plastered to his forehead, the black hole of the gun turning inward, the brass St. Metal swinging from her throat where she had tied it on during the bandaging. This was the choice. Shoot Crow dead, or trust a different ending. Eli pirit. His bullet hit the gallows pin above Crow's head. The soaked timber split with a crack like lightning in wood. The crossbeam dropped sideways, slamming Crow across the shoulders and driving him face first into the mud. His pistol spun away. Nora wrenched free and kicked it under the scaffold. Eli was on Crow a heartbeat later, revolver pressed to the back of his skull. Crow coughed mud and blood. "Do it. Elias minger taitenet." Then he heard boots pounding through the gate. Townsmen, women with lanterns, old men with shovels. 2 freight guards from the road depot. Brack sat in the mud staring at Crow pinned under the broken beam, at Eli's gun, at Nora standing unbowed, at the mission bell still shaking above them. Ben's voice rang down from the tower. "The ledger is here. Judge Wren wrote every theft." Nora bent, pulled the ledger from under her coat where Ben had passed it back through the tower slit, and held it high. Rain ran over the pages. Crow stole the Hale Spring, bought witnesses, murdered Judge Wren, and ordered my brother hanged to bury it. Faces in the gate changed one by one, fear making room for anger. Brax struggled to his feet. His hand shook. He looked at Crow, then at the townspeople, then at Eli. "If the ledger proves it, I will sign the warrant." Crow laughed through broken breath. "You spineless dog." "Maybe," Brax said, "but tonight I'm a dog that bites the hand that fed him." He took out his cuffs. Eli lifted the revolver from Crow's head. "I meant to miss," he said. Crow glared up at him. "What?" Eli looked toward Nora, toward Ben on the bell rope, toward the people of Bitterwash standing in rain with lantern light on their wet faces. "Because mercy is not surrender. It is choosing what kind of man gets to live inside your bones." By dawn, Crow and Pike were bound for the territorial jail in the freight wagon under armed guard. Brax rode ahead with the warrant and the ledger wrapped in oilcloth. The storm passed east. Sunlight broke over the valley in long copper bands, touching the mission crosses, the torn yard, the freed horses, the washed clean boards of the gallows lying ruined in the mud. Ben stood with the rope burn on his throat and a steadier look in his eyes. He had not become hard overnight. Better than that, he had become careful. Nora leaned on the graveyard fence, hair still damp, shotgun across one arm. What now, Eli Mercer? He took the brass saint from his pocket and hung it on the fence nail beside her hand. "If you will have the labor, I know how to rebuild roofs." She looked at the metal, then at him. "Can you shoe horses, too?" "I learned fast." A smile touched one corner of her mouth, small but real. "Good, because the livery is half splinters, and I am sure a man who knows the cost of missing on purpose." Years later, travelers stopping at the rebuilt Hale livery would ask about the bent brass Saint nailed above the office door and the nicked bullet set beside it in a square of glass. Nora would say one marked the night fire failed to finish a family, and the other marked the night Mercy finally learned how to aim. And at sundown, when the valley turned gold and the horses breathed softly in their stalls, 2 shadows would stand in the doorway together, watching the clean water of Hale Spring catch the last light like a promise that had finally reached home.